Have you ever met someone who seemed incredibly kind, deeply understanding, almost angelic in the way they listened to you? But deep down, something about them felt strangely unsettling? As if their eyes could see through your soul, not with love, but with a cold, clinical detachment? You couldn't put your finger on it, yet every instinct in your body whispered, "Be careful." We often hear about narcissists. They are loud, manipulative, desperate for attention, and usually reveal themselves with time. But Carl Jung pointed to a far more dangerous archetype, one that hides behind the mask of compassion. He called attention to what we might today call the cold empath. Unlike the narcissist, who thrives on being seen, the cold empath thrives on watching silently, knowing exactly what you need to hear, what you long to feel, and how to use that knowledge. Not always to heal, but sometimes to control, to exploit, and to destroy. Imagine this. You meet someone at a difficult time in your life. They listen with patience. They validate your feelings. They never interrupt. Their words touch you so deeply that you begin to trust them almost instantly. You think to yourself, finally, someone who understands me. But weeks later, you realize that everything you shared with them, your fears, your dreams, your secrets, has become a weapon in their hands. They don't explode in rage like a narcissist would. Instead, they quietly pull strings, shaping your choices, twisting your emotions, guiding you toward outcomes that serve their hidden agenda. That is the cold empath. And Jung believed such people were among the most dangerous personalities you could ever encounter. Why? Because empathy, when stripped of warmth, when divorced from genuine compassion, becomes a scalpel in the wrong hands. It allows a person to cut into your psyche, to understand your deepest wounds, not to heal them, but to keep them open, bleeding slowly, so you remain dependent. Jung warned us that the shadow doesn't always appear as a monster roaring in the dark. Sometimes it smiles, sometimes it comforts, sometimes it pretends to save you, until you are too entangled to escape. Tonight, we're going to go on a journey. Not a lecture, not a list of traits, but a story. One that reveals why the cold empath is more dangerous than the narcissist, how they operate, why so many people fall under their spell, and what Carl Jung can teach us about protecting ourselves from their hidden claws. So sit back, let the world fade away for a while, and listen carefully, because what you're about to hear might change the way you look at people forever. Picture a man named Daniel. He was charming, polite, and most of all, attentive. When people spoke, he leaned in, as though every word mattered. In a crowded room full of noise, Daniel had a way of making you feel like you were the only person alive. His friends described him as empathetic, almost saintly. Women confided in him easily. Men trusted him quickly. But Daniel carried something within him that no one could see. His empathy wasn't rooted in love. It was rooted in power. He understood people, yes, but he understood them the way a hunter understands his prey. Daniel was what Jung might call a cold empath. He did not crave the spotlight like a narcissist. He did not shout for recognition. Instead, he studied silently, watching how others moved, how they spoke, how their eyes flickered when they lied, how their lips trembled when they were afraid. And he remembered everything. To the outside world, Daniel was the perfect friend. But inside, he felt nothing. One evening, he met a woman named Anna. She had just gone through a painful breakup. She sat quietly at a cafe, her eyes fixed on the rain sliding down the glass. Daniel approached with a soft smile, not too bold, not too intrusive. "Rough day?" he asked gently. She laughed nervously, surprised by the kindness of a stranger. Within minutes, Daniel had her talking about her heartbreak, her loneliness, her fears of never being loved again. And with every word, Daniel nodded, his eyes locked on hers, his tone compassionate. Anna felt something she hadn't felt in months, understood. What she didn't know was that Daniel wasn't simply listening. He was collecting. Every confession she made became a thread in the web he was spinning. He knew exactly how to mirror her pain, how to reflect it back in a way that made her believe he was her safe place. But in truth, Daniel didn't care whether Anna healed or suffered. What mattered was the control he gained the moment she began to trust him. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But with a cold empath, the reaction is one-sided. You are transformed, while they remain unchanged. They feed on your transformation, not to grow themselves, but to bend you into a shape that fits their hidden desires. This is where the danger lies. A narcissist, in their vanity, often exposes themselves. Their arrogance becomes obvious. Their rage betrays them. And over time, people learn to keep their distance. But the cold empath, they rarely reveal themselves. Their weapon is subtlety. Their mask never cracks. They can walk through your life like a shadow, and you may never know they were the reason you doubted yourself, questioned your choices, or stayed in chains far longer than you should have. Daniel, for example, never raised his voice at Anna. He never insulted her. In fact, he always seemed supportive, but his support was selective. When Anna spoke of applying for a new job, he reminded her of her past failures, cloaked in gentle concern. "I just don't want you to get hurt again," he'd whisper. When she thought about reconnecting with friends, he'd suggest they might not understand her the way he did. Slowly, Anna's world grew smaller, and in that small world, Daniel was the center. This is the hallmark of the cold empath. They isolate you not by force, but by making you believe it's for your own good. And because they never act with open hostility, you find it almost impossible to accuse them of wrongdoing. After all, how do you explain to others that the person who comforts you is also the person who suffocates you? Carl Jung understood that empathy itself is not inherently good. He warned that the shadow can corrupt even our most beautiful qualities. Empathy without heart becomes manipulation. Understanding without love becomes control. And when such qualities live in the shadows of a cold empath, they can inflict wounds deeper than any narcissist could. Now pause for a moment. Think about someone in your life who listens more than they speak. Someone who always knows the right words, who seems too good, too flawless. Does that mean they are a cold empath? Not necessarily, but Jung teaches us to pay attention to the energy beneath the surface. Is their empathy warm, filled with genuine care? Or does it feel like a mirror reflecting you back at yourself, leaving you strangely unsettled afterward? Daniel's story is not unique. History is filled with figures who used their cold empathy to rise to power. Leaders who swayed nations not with anger, but with quiet understanding of people's fears and desires. Partners who controlled relationships not with abuse, but with subtle psychological chains. Colleagues who climbed the ladder not through brilliance, but through their uncanny ability to read and exploit others. And here lies the ultimate warning. Narcissists want to be admired. Cold empaths want to be obeyed. Narcissists shout for attention. Cold empaths whisper into your heart. Narcissists may burn you quickly, but cold empaths freeze you slowly until you don't even notice you've turned to ice. As Anna sank deeper into Daniel's orbit, she felt both safe and dependent. Her friends noticed she smiled less, spoke less, and rarely joined their gatherings anymore. Yet when they asked about Daniel, she defended him fiercely. "He's the only one who really understands me," she'd say. And in her mind, that was true. What she didn't realize was that Daniel wasn't giving her freedom. He was giving her a carefully measured dose of comfort, just enough to keep her tethered. This is how the cold empath operates. They don't conquer through domination, but through surrender. They don't chain you with iron, but with velvet. And that is why their influence is so dangerous. You rarely see the trap until it has already closed around you. Carl Jung would say that Anna had projected her anima, her inner longing for healing and connection, onto Daniel. She saw in him what she desperately wanted to see: a savior, a listener, a guide. But Jung also warned us about the dangers of projection. When we give someone else the keys to our soul, we are blind to their shadow. We see only what we need, not what truly is. Daniel knew this instinctively. He didn't need to lie to Anna. He simply needed to let her own loneliness fill the gaps. And as she poured her energy into him, he grew stronger, not out of love, but out of control. He had no rage, no tantrums, no outbursts. His calmness was his greatest weapon, because when someone never raises their voice, you begin to believe they could never harm you. But harm can come in silence as much as in screams. One night, Anna confided in Daniel about her biggest dream. She wanted to write a book, a story about her childhood, the pain she endured, and the resilience she discovered. For the first time in weeks, her eyes lit up with passion. Daniel listened quietly, nodding, encouraging her with small smiles. But when she finished, he leaned forward and said, I think it's beautiful that you dream like this. But are you sure anyone would really want to read it? I'd hate to see you disappointed." The words seemed harmless, even caring. Yet in Anna's heart, they planted a seed of doubt. The very person she trusted most had questioned her deepest dream. And because Daniel was always so calm, so supportive, she believed his words must be true. Over time, she stopped writing. She convinced herself it wasn't worth trying. And Daniel never had to forbid her. He simply made her doubt herself. This is the signature of the cold empath. They erode your confidence not with force, but with suggestion. They dim your light, not by blowing it out, but by convincing you it was never bright enough in the first place. Carl Jung described the shadow as the part of ourselves we refuse to see. But what happens when another person sees your shadow more clearly than you do, and instead of helping you integrate it, they use it to keep you weak? That is the danger we are exploring tonight. Let's take a step back and compare the narcissist to the cold empath. A narcissist thrives on chaos. They shout, they brag, they gaslight, and eventually they reveal themselves. Their ego is their undoing. But a cold empath doesn't need chaos. They thrive in stillness. They wait. They listen. They guide you just enough so that you walk into the cage willingly. And because you walked in, you believe you chose it. That illusion of choice is the cruelest trick of all. Now imagine this scenario. You have a colleague at work, someone who always notices when you're stressed. They bring you coffee when you've had a bad day. They compliment you subtly. They never argue. Over time, you begin to confide in them. You tell them about your frustrations with your boss, your doubts about your abilities, your dreams of leaving for a better job. And because they always respond with gentle understanding, you trust them more and more. But behind the scenes, they're carefully storing every detail. One day, when the opportunity comes, they use your words to undermine you. They position themselves as the reliable one, while painting you as unstable, not by lying outright, but by sharing concerns that sound like they're protecting you. By the time you realize what happened, your reputation is damaged, and they've moved 2 steps ahead. Do you see the difference? A narcissist wants you to admire them. A cold empath wants to know you so deeply that they can dismantle you from the inside out, without you ever realizing it was them. Jung would argue that this archetype is far more sinister because it operates in the unconscious. You cannot fight what you cannot see. But here's the question that matters most. Why do cold empaths become this way? How can someone with such deep emotional awareness use it not to heal, but to harm? The answer lies again in Jung's teachings. Jung believed that empathy is a double-edged sword. It gives us the ability to connect, but it also gives us the ability to manipulate. For most people, empathy is tempered by conscience, by love, by compassion. But when those qualities are missing, when someone has learned to detach from their own heart, empathy becomes purely cognitive. They know how you feel, but they don't feel it with you. They can map your emotions like a blueprint without ever sharing in your pain. And in that detachment lies their power. Cold empaths are often forged in childhood. Perhaps they grew up in households where emotions were volatile, where they had to study every gesture, every shift in tone, just to survive. They became experts at reading others, but they never learned to trust. Empathy became a shield, a survival tool, not a bridge of love. Over time, that survival skill hardened into a weapon. They discovered they could navigate the world not by being the loudest, but by being the quietest watcher in the room. Daniel, for example, grew up in a family where love was conditional. His father was harsh, his mother distant. As a boy, he learned quickly that to avoid punishment, he had to sense his father's moods before words were spoken. He had to notice the twitch of an eyebrow, the clench of a fist, the silence at the dinner table. His survival depended on predicting others' emotions, but no one predicted his. No one listened to his heart, so he stopped expecting love. And when he became an adult, his empathy was cold, sharp as glass, but without warmth. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the shadow. If we do not confront the wounds of our past, if we do not bring light to the darkness within, our gifts can become curses. Daniel's gift was empathy, but in the shadows, it became control. And those who encountered him never knew they were dealing with someone who could read their soul without ever offering his own. Now let's return to Anna. Months passed, and she no longer recognized herself. Her world revolved around Daniel. She no longer dreamed, no longer reached for more, and yet she clung to him, because every time she thought of leaving, his gentle words wrapped around her like chains. "You're not ready yet," he'd whisper. "But don't worry, I'll always be here for you." The tragedy was that Anna believed this was love, and that is the final danger of the cold empath. They don't just control you, they make you believe that control is care. The grip of a cold empath is not forged with chains you can see, but with invisible threads that feel like comfort. That's what makes their influence so disorienting. Anna often told herself, "Daniel has never hurt me. He's always so patient, so calm. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I expect too much." And that is how the cold empath ensures their victims stay silent, by turning doubt inward, so you question yourself instead of questioning them. Jung once wrote that the greatest danger is not what we see in others, but what we fail to see in ourselves. Anna couldn't see how much of her power she had handed over. She mistook dependence for devotion. She mistook silence for peace. And she mistook manipulation for love. This confusion is the cold empath's true battlefield, the human heart. But Anna was not the only one caught in Daniel's web. There was another friend in their circle, a man named Samuel. Unlike Anna, Samuel wasn't vulnerable in the same way. He was confident, social, and ambitious. Yet Daniel treated him differently. He didn't try to control Samuel directly. Instead, he listened carefully to Samuel's goals, his frustrations with work, his rivalry with a coworker. And slowly, Daniel began to plant seeds, not of doubt this time, but of rivalry. "You know," Daniel said one evening, "your colleague seems to get a lot of credit for things you've actually done. Have you noticed that?" Samuel hadn't thought much of it before, but the more Daniel mentioned it, always with a subtle tone of concern, the more Samuel began to feel resentment. Within months, Samuel had started to see his colleague as an enemy. He became suspicious, competitive, even hostile. Daniel never pushed him openly, but he didn't need to. He had simply nudged Samuel's perception, and Samuel's own pride did the rest. Do you see the difference? Anna was ensnared by dependence. Samuel was poisoned by rivalry, yet both were manipulated by the same hand, and neither realized it. This is why the cold empath is so dangerous. They don't use a single weapon. They use the weapon that works best for each person. They study your wounds, your desires, your weaknesses, and they adapt. Like a chameleon, they become exactly what you need them to be, until you cannot imagine life without them. Carl Jung believed that archetypes, universal patterns of human behavior, reside deep within our unconscious. The cold empath embodies the archetype of the shadow healer. They appear as the one who listens, the one who guides, the one who understands. But beneath the mask, they heal nothing. Instead, they exploit the very trust their mask creates. And because they seem so caring, so patient, they escape suspicion far longer than a narcissist ever could. One evening, Anna confided in a friend from her past, someone she hadn't spoken to in months. The friend listened, concerned, and finally said, "Anna, do you realize you're not the same person anymore? You've stopped writing. You've stopped laughing. You've stopped dreaming. What happened to you?" Anna bristled at the question. "Daniel understands me. He supports me. You don't know what you're talking about." Her friend sighed. "I don't doubt that he listens. But does he lift you up, or does he hold you still?" Those words lingered in Anna's mind long after the conversation ended. For the first time in months, she asked herself a dangerous question. What if Daniel wasn't helping me? What if he was holding me back? That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed every moment in her head, every gentle warning, every quiet concern, every subtle suggestion. And she realized something chilling. Daniel had never encouraged her to grow. He had only ever encouraged her to stay. This was the crack in the illusion. And once a crack appears, the entire mask begins to fall apart. Jung taught that the shadow thrives in silence. It grows stronger when unexamined. But the moment we shine a light on it, when we ask difficult questions, when we confront uncomfortable truths, it begins to lose its power. Anna didn't know it yet, but that sleepless night was the beginning of her awakening. The next morning, she tried something different. She mentioned to Daniel, casually, that she had started writing again. She expected him to be supportive. Instead, his smile faltered, just for a moment. He recovered quickly, of course, with a soft laugh. "That's wonderful, Anna. But don't you think you should wait until things are more stable in your life? You've already got so much on your plate." For the first time, Anna noticed the pattern. Every time she wanted to rise, Daniel reminded her to stay low. Every time she wanted to reach forward, he pulled her back, with concern disguised as love. And now she could feel the coldness behind his words, the lack of warmth in his so-called empathy. Her heart pounded. She realized she was sitting across from someone who didn't actually want her to be free. Someone who wanted her to remain small, because her smallness was his control. And in that moment, fear washed over her, because she understood the truth Jung had warned about. A person who can see your soul without love in their heart is far more dangerous than a narcissist shouting for attention. The narcissist may wound your pride, but the cold empath can steal your very sense of self. Still, Anna wasn't ready to leave. The chains were too tight, and the comfort too familiar. This is another reason cold empaths are so dangerous. They create dependency. Even when you see the harm, you cling to the illusion of safety. After all, it feels easier to stay with the devil who comforts you than to face the uncertainty of walking away alone. But Jung also believed in individuation, the process of becoming whole, of reclaiming your true self from the shadows. And whether Anna knew it or not, she had just taken her first step on that journey. The days after Anna's realization felt heavier than before. She looked at Daniel differently now, though she said nothing. His voice, once soothing, now carried an undertone she couldn't ignore. His smiles felt like veils, his questions like hooks. The spell had cracked, but not yet shattered. One evening, Daniel asked her, "Why have you been so quiet lately? You seem distant." Anna forced a smile. "Just tired, I guess." But inside, she was trembling. She realized that Daniel noticed everything. Just as he had once studied her wounds to offer comfort, now he was studying her silence. That's the cruelty of the cold empath. They don't just read your words. They read your absences. They sense the shift in your energy before you even understand it yourself. Carl Jung described this as the unconscious dialogue that happens between people. We think we are speaking only with words, but much of what we communicate is invisible. The cold empath thrives in this invisible space. They see the subtle hesitations, the flicker in your eyes, the doubt you carry. And if their heart is warm, they use this awareness to connect. But if their heart is cold, they use it to bind. Anna began journaling again in secret. Late at night, while Daniel was away, she would pour her thoughts onto paper. "I don't know who I am anymore," she wrote. "I feel like a bird with clipped wings. Every time I want to fly, he tells me the sky is dangerous. But isn't it more dangerous never to fly at all?" As she wrote, she felt something stir within her, the faint echo of her old self. It wasn't strong yet, but it was there. Jung believed that the self is always present, even when buried under layers of shadow. Like a flame under ashes, it waits for the moment when the wind blows just right to ignite again. But Daniel sensed the change. One night, he said, "You've been different lately. I hope you're not listening to people who don't understand us. They'll only try to take you away from what's real." Anna's heart raced. The words were gentle, yet possessive. She heard what she had never noticed before. The fear in Daniel's control. He needed her to stay, because her dependence was his power. A narcissist demands attention loudly, but the cold empath depends on your silence. If you awaken, their control slips away. For the first time, Anna didn't argue or explain. She simply nodded. But inside, she knew she couldn't stay trapped forever. Let's pause here and step back into Jung's lens. Why is the cold empath more dangerous than the narcissist? It's because the narcissist feeds on validation, and sooner or later, their hunger becomes obvious. Their tantrums, their arrogance, their contradictions, they reveal themselves. But the cold empath, they don't need to reveal anything. They thrive in your trust, in your secrets, in the space you willingly hand over. Their strength comes not from exposure, but from invisibility. And the invisible enemy is always the most dangerous. Anna began to test small acts of freedom. She called an old friend. She spent an afternoon writing without telling Daniel. She looked in the mirror and asked herself questions she had avoided for months. What do I want? What have I lost? What would I be without him? These were dangerous questions, because they cracked the illusion further. Jung warned that individuation, the journey to reclaim the self, always begins with conflict. The old self fights to remain, while the true self fights to emerge. Anna was caught in that battle now. One night, Daniel surprised her with flowers. He smiled warmly, but Anna noticed something she hadn't before. His eyes didn't match the smile. They were studying her, calculating, as though searching for signs of rebellion. And in that moment, she felt a chill deeper than ever. She realized that Daniel's empathy was never about love, it was about surveillance. He didn't listen to understand her soul. He listened to control it. This was the revelation Jung spoke of when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Anna had spent months believing her fate was to be Daniel's quiet companion, but now she saw it differently. Her unconscious dependence had blinded her, and Daniel had thrived in that blindness. Now that she could see, the chains began to loosen. Still, Leaving a cold empath is not easy. They don't rage when you pull away. They tighten their embrace. They don't threaten to leave. They remind you how lost you'd be without them. Daniel began to do exactly that. "You know, Anna," he said softly, "people don't understand us. But that's because they've never had what we have. You and I, we're different." On the surface, it sounded like devotion. But beneath it, Anna heard the trap. "We're different" meant you have no one else. "People don't understand us" meant don't listen to anyone but me. Once, she would have melted at those words. Now, she saw the prison they carried. Her journaling became her lifeline. Each night, she wrote the truth she couldn't yet speak aloud. "I am not weak. I am not small. I am not his to keep." Slowly, her heart began to believe the words. This is the paradox Jung invites us to face. The most dangerous people we encounter are not the ones who scream at us, but the ones who whisper what we want to hear. Because their whispers can drown out the voice of our own soul, and when we lose that voice, we lose ourselves. But the soul never stays silent forever. Anna's was beginning to rise. The weeks passed, and Anna's secret rebellion grew bolder. She smiled more when she was alone. She picked up her pen with purpose. She began to laugh with her old friends again, cautiously at first, then with more freedom. And every step she took away from Daniel, she felt the warmth of her true self returning. But Daniel noticed. He always noticed. One evening, he invited Anna to dinner at a quiet restaurant. Candlelight flickered across his calm, careful face. He reached for her hand and said softly, "I feel like we're drifting apart, and I don't want that to happen. You mean too much to me." On the surface, his words were tender. Anyone listening nearby might have thought he was the perfect partner. But Anna felt the weight beneath the words. This wasn't love. It was a plea for control. His eyes weren't filled with fear of losing her heart. They were filled with fear of losing his power. She squeezed his hand gently and said, "I just need space to find myself again." Daniel tilted his head, smiling faintly, but his silence spoke volumes. In that silence, Anna realized something crucial. A narcissist would have raged, demanded, accused. But Daniel, he simply watched. And that watchfulness was far more terrifying, because he didn't need to explode to keep her in check. He only needed to wait for her to doubt herself again. Carl Jung would call this the power of the shadow at work. The shadow doesn't need to scream to control us. It whispers. It hides in the quiet corners of our psyche, guiding our steps while we convince ourselves we're free. Daniel's quiet was the embodiment of that shadow. The more Anna pulled back, the more Daniel leaned in, not with anger, but with gentleness. He sent her kind messages, reminded her of their special bond, offered to help with little tasks. His strategy was simple, to remind her that life was easier with him than without him. And for many, this is how the cold empath keeps their hold. They make dependency feel like comfort. But Anna was no longer blind. One night, she sat at her desk, her journal open, and she wrote a single sentence over and over. "Comfort is not the same as freedom." Those words became her mantra. Jung believed that individuation requires us to face the terrifying realization that we are alone in our journey. No one can walk it for us, and no matter how much comfort others offer, if that comfort cages us, it is not love. It is bondage. The next day, Anna made a choice. She called Daniel and said, "I think I need some time apart. I need to figure out who I am outside of this." The silence on the other end was long. Finally, Daniel said, "If that's what you really want, I won't stop you. But just remember, no one will understand you like I do." It was both a release and a warning. Anna hung up and cried, not because she doubted her decision, but because breaking free from invisible chains is always painful. Freedom hurts at first. It feels like tearing skin, like losing a part of yourself. But in truth, what she was losing was not herself at all. It was the illusion of safety Daniel had woven around her. Weeks passed, and Daniel faded from her life. He didn't beg, he didn't rage, he didn't plead. That was not his way. He simply disappeared, leaving behind a silence that was both liberating and haunting. Anna kept writing. Every day, she poured herself onto paper, and with every word, she reclaimed the parts of herself she had lost. She began to see that Daniel had never stolen her dreams. He had only convinced her to set them aside, and now, with her pen in hand, she could pick them up again. This is the final cruelty of the cold empath. They don't take your life away. They convince you to put it down yourself. That's why they are more dangerous than narcissists. Narcissists wound you openly. Cold empaths persuade you to wound yourself. And in doing so, they leave you doubting not just them, but your own judgment. Carl Jung warned that the most insidious shadow is the one we don't recognize. The cold empath is exactly that, a shadow wearing the mask of light. They seem kind, but they freeze your growth. They seem supportive, but they bind your wings. They seem empathetic, but their empathy is hollow, detached, and chilling. Yet Jung also taught that once we recognize the shadow, it loses much of its power. Anna's awakening proved this. By naming the truth, by seeing Daniel not as a savior but as a captor, she broke the spell. It didn't happen overnight. Healing never does. But every day, she walked a little farther into her own light. And this is where the story becomes universal. Because Anna is not alone. Perhaps you have known a Daniel. Perhaps you have felt the chilling comfort of someone who seemed to understand you better than anyone else, only to realize later that their empathy carried no warmth. Perhaps you've doubted yourself because their quiet words lingered in your mind long after they were gone. If so, let Anna's story be your reminder. Empathy without love is not safety. It is strategy. And no matter how gentle it appears, strategy is not care. Months had passed since Anna walked away from Daniel, but his shadow still lingered. Sometimes, when she was alone at night, she would hear his voice in her memory, calm, gentle, almost soothing. And yet, beneath it, she now heard what she had once missed, the coldness, the lack of warmth, the hollow echo of a man who could mirror her feelings but never truly feel them. One evening, Anna returned to the quiet cafe where she used to write before Daniel entered her life. She carried her old leather journal, its pages now filled with raw, unfiltered truth. As she sat near the window, she noticed a young woman at a nearby table, staring at her phone with tears in her eyes. Anna recognized that look instantly. It was the look of someone tangled in the invisible threads of a relationship that felt like love, but was really control. Their eyes met for only a second, and Anna gave a small smile. Not the forced smile of someone pretending everything was fine, but a real one, gentle, warm, reassuring. And in that moment, Anna realized the full weight of what Jung had taught. The shadow is not defeated by destroying it, but by integrating it, by naming it, by seeing it clearly for what it is. The danger of the cold empath is their invisibility. They slip into your life like a whisper, offering comfort when you're most vulnerable, reflecting back the parts of you that you long to see loved. But their empathy is an illusion. It is a mirror without depth, a river that looks clear on the surface, but freezes your spirit the moment you step in. Narcissists, with all their chaos, are easier to spot. They demand. They wound. They burn bright and obvious. But the cold empath hides in silence, in subtlety, in the softness of words that feel safe, but steal your freedom. That is why Carl Jung would argue they are more dangerous, because they don't just harm your heart. They erode your trust in your own perception. They make you doubt yourself. And when you doubt yourself, you hand over the keys to your soul. But here is the truth Anna discovered, and the truth you must hold on to. No one, Not even the most convincing voice can define your worth. Your soul does not need permission to shine. Your freedom does not need someone else's blessing. And your dreams are never too fragile to carry on your own shoulders. There is a chilling brilliance in the way the cold empath operates, yes. But there is a greater power still, the power of awareness. When you see them for who they are, when you call out the illusion, when you decide that comfort is not worth the cost of your freedom, you win. The spell breaks, and in that breaking, you find yourself again. Anna left the cafe that night with a lighter step. The past was still with her, but it no longer defined her. She had faced the shadow, she had walked through the silence, and she had emerged stronger. Not because Daniel disappeared, but because she reclaimed the parts of herself she once gave away. And maybe that is what Jung wanted us to understand all along. That the shadows we fear, whether they come as narcissists, cold empaths, or even as our own hidden patterns, are not invincible. They are reflections of what we refuse to see. Once we turn toward them, once we shine light into their darkness, their power begins to fade. So if you take nothing else from Anna's story, take this. Do not mistake control for care. Do not confuse quiet empathy with love. And do not let anyone convince you that comfort is worth the cost of your soul. Because the greatest danger is not being hurt by others. It is forgetting who you are in the process. And if you've been there, if you've faced your own Daniel, then let this story be your reminder that you are not broken. You are not weak. You are awakening. That is why the cold empath is more dangerous than the narcissist. Not because they are stronger, but because they are harder to see. And yet, once you see them, you hold the power they tried to keep from you all along. So ask yourself tonight, who holds the mirror in your life? And does that reflection bring you warmth, or does it leave you cold? If this story moved you, if you found yourself in Anna's journey, then let's keep this conversation alive. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below with your own reflections. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because we'll keep exploring the hidden truths of psychology, the wisdom of Carl Jung, and the shadows that shape our lives. And remember, the shadow only has power when it stays hidden. The moment you bring it into the light, it begins to disappear. Until next time, take care of your soul.